Hello everybody and welcome to the fourth video in our series of videos on peace and war in Europe from 1920 to 1945. Today we are looking at Mussolini's Italy. Mussolini ruled Italy from 1922 to 1945, and this is the one of two videos we'll be doing on Mussolini and the rise of fascism. As always, we begin with our learning outcomes. So for today's learning outcomes, you guys should be able to explain what fascism is. You guys should know two reasons why fascism became popular after World War I. And finally, you guys should know what the March on Rome was. So to begin with, we ask the question, what exactly is fascism? It's a word that is used quite a lot, but to put a definition on it, what we are going to use moving forward is that fascism is a political system where a strong ruler has complete control over a country and that there are no elections, so he can't be overthrown. Okay? And the leader of a fascist government is known as a dictator. And the big question then is, why did fascism become so popular after World War I? We're looking at Mussolini here. We'll also look at Hitler, and then also in France, General Franco takes over after the Spanish Civil War. So why did it become so popular? Well, there were four main reasons that we can kind of identify. The first was that people were afraid that communists would take over and take everything they owned. We looked at the communist revolution that had broke out in Russia in 1917, and this really brought a lot of fear to the people in Europe. The communism would spread. We saw some of the horrible things that Stalin did to take land, and people feared that stuff like this might happen. The second reason why fascism became popular after World War I was that there were a lot of economic problems around Europe at the time, a lot of poverty and unemployment. The third thing that helped fascism become popular after World War I was that many countries believed that their country was the greatest and should be more powerful. This idea of nationalism is something that really spread at this time, and it's something that is on the rise again in society at the minute, whereby people are very proud of their own nation, but to the extent where the pride of their own nation makes them feel superior to other nations. The final thing that we point to as to why nationalism became popular after World War I was that many people in Italy and Germany, in particular, were unhappy with the Treaty of Versailles. An easy way of trying to remember these things, we use acronyms and stuff like this. So I like to use the acronym SENSE. So there was the fear of communism, economic problems, rise of nationalism, and the unfair Treaty of Versailles. So to launch into Mussolini now, the first country that set up a fascist government was Italy. The man who became the dictator of Italy was called Benito Mussolini. Before we go into Mussolini's reign, we're going to have a brief look back at what you guys might know about Italian history. So we're going to have a brief look at the history of Italy. What you've already studied, you guys would know that ancient Rome was the capital city of Italy and was the largest empire in the world at one time. When Mussolini takes over, what he wants to do is he draws on the greatness of the Roman Empire as a call to arms as to how great Italy should be and how it should be above other nations. There was also in the 1500s we would have studied the Renaissance, and so during the 1500s there was an artistic revolution that led to some of the greatest works of art, like the Mona Lisa. And again, Mussolini is going to point to this as an example of why Italy is more superior to other countries and deserves more. And then what happens to Italy after that? In 1870, Italy finally became a country, the country that we all know today, when all the city-states that had been warring for a long time came together to form one unified country under Mazzini. Finally, as we touched on this with World War I, Italy joined World War I on the Allied side in 1915, and when they signed the Treaty of London with Britain, there were secret clauses within the treaty which promised Italy more land if Italy had joined their side. However, when the Treaty of Versailles comes about, the Italians were kept out of negotiations. Woodrow Wilson's policy of self-determination denied Italy some of the territorial gains they were looking for. And so they were denied what had been promised them, and they were angry about this. Again, we're going to point to the communist threat, and this was a real thing as to why fascism took off in Italy. So remember that in 1917 there had been a revolution in Russia led by Lenin and the Bolsheviks. So communism again was this idea that all wealth should be shared out equally. and many poor Italians believed that democracy had failed them. It had brought them into this vicious war from which there was no real benefits, and now they were suffering the economic problems of it. And many of them would have seen communism as the way forward. So the state strikes, and there was a real threat of a communist revolution in Italy after World War One. So Mussolini then used these problems as a chance to enter politics. Mussolini had been a reporter at the time, uh, and he wrote some kind of extreme, kind of right wing ideas down. Began to get a bit of popular support in 1919 election. He got no seats, but because he had this platform, his popularity began to skyrocket. The question is, how did he go from just this kind of madcap journalist to becoming the dictator of Italy within 3 years? There are a few things. So he was a great speaker, and his criticism of the Treaty of Versailles, it was popular with the ex-soldiers of Italy. So those men who went and served were unhappy with the Treaty of Versailles. They felt they'd gone, and their friends had died for nothing, and they weren't getting rewarded. And Mussolini took advantage of this. Another reason was that the Italian governments after World War One were weak, and they didn't sort out any of the problems that Italy was facing. They weren't dealing with the communists, they weren't dealing with the right wing, they weren't dealing with the economic problems. They'd folded on the Treaty of Versailles. So Mussolini again exploited this fact. Mussolini also had a group known as the Squadristi, or the Black Shirts, and these were ex-soldiers, and they were kind of like thugs who used to fight street battles against communists. Okay, it was like gang warfare out there. So Mussolini had these guys, the Squadristi, or the Black Shirts, who would go and fight against the communists, and he would point to this as an example of how he would stop communism. He also got support of many of the leading and influential businessmen for his party. Again, these influential businessmen were terrified of communism coming in. Mussolini promised that his party, the National Fascist Party, would not tolerate communism. So he got funding and he got support from the rich in Italy. How he actually came to power is in a coup called the March on Rome. So in October of 1922, Mussolini said that unless he was made prime minister, he and his followers would march on Rome and take power. At the time, the Italian King Victor Emmanuel III, he panicked and he gave in to Mussolini's demands. He forced the resignation of the prime minister of Italy, and Mussolini was then uh, installed as the new prime minister. And then afterwards, as a celebration, he and his supporters marched on Rome. It's important to know that the March on Rome was it was the threat of the March on Rome rather than the March on Rome that put Mussolini in power. And the actual March on Rome was almost like a victory march. So that brings us to the end of our presentation today. So by now, you guys should be able to explain what fascism is. You guys should know two reasons why fascism became popular after World War One. You said acronym SENT, and then finally, you guys should know what the March on Rome was, which brought Mussolini to power. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys got something good from this video.